All right, welcome to my little bonus video that I'm preparing here on buying bearings. Buying bearings is something that you're probably going to find yourself having to do pretty often. Sometimes you have a part number you have from the manufacturer, from their documentation, that it's pretty easy to go buy it from McMaster Car, from Grainger. Grainger is great for buying parts if you have a part number. www.grainger.com. Also, Grainger has a lot of stores scattered all around the United States, so it's easy to purchase some of their standard products from the stores, which they have a really good distribution on. However, I'm going to go to McMaster, which is my favorite source of knowledge. Not necessarily my place that I buy all my stuff from, but it's my favorite source of knowledge. So what I'm going to do is share my screen, and I'm going to take you through the bearings that you can buy from McMaster Car. So we're going to share my screen, and we're going to start recording. Actually, I'm recording. So if you go to McMaster Car and you just type in bearings, okay, you get in there and it takes you through all the different kind of bearings that they provide. And right now you can see immediately it's worth knowing some of the terminology, right, that you learned in the book. However, there's some additional terminology that they use in the industry that's useful to know, and that's one reason why I'm doing this video. So let's expand this a little bit, and we can see that on the left you have different parameters you can put in for the kind of bearing that you're buying. And the first thing you have is a selection whether it's a US standard inches, feet bearing, or is it a metric bearing. And you can also select the second thing, which is your shaft diameter. And that's probably the single most important common thing that sizes your bearing properly, is make sure it's sized for the correct shaft. And then you've got various other parameters start happening after that, like the housing, inner diameter, and the outer diameter, and so forth. And you also can see that you've got very rapidly some other things that you can select them. For instance, you've got the seal type. You've got some bearings that are open. They have no seal. That means they can only be in environments where if there's a contaminant in that environment, it won't hurt the bearing. You also have shielded, and then you've got sealed. Shielded means it's got a steel shield in place, but it's not highly sealed. That means liquid or gases could get around that shield and potentially get into the bearing. Usually shielded are used for greased bearings, which require regular greasing from a grease gun. And sealed bearings are generally sealed in so that they never can be greased. They are designed so that they stay sealed for their entire lifetime. If the seal breaks or you disrupt the seal by the way you install that bearing, which is a common mistake, then you just have to pull that bearing off and replace it with a new one. Very quickly as well, you run into some of the key books characteristics of the load direction. You've got the radial load, you've got the thrust load. Now don't forget the thrust load, they call it the thrust load. This is more common than what the book calls thrust, which is axial load. And then you've got combination loads. So these are all very important things. And then you can also talk about the kind of material that you're going to make the bearing out of. So let's talk about the different kinds of bearings. Obviously, you've got basic ball bearings. Now these are designed for a huge number of applications. They're basically balls that spin inside of a race and that are used from everything outside in the world. Then you've got plain bearings, which are the bearings without the balls or the little cylinders in them. And the plain bearings are made of bronze or plastic. Then you've got mounted bearings and specialty bearings, and there's a lot down here. I'm not going to go through all of them. For instance, roller bearings tend to be specific for roller applications where you've got some combination of thrust on it plus radial loading, and you see specialty Applications. Mounted bearings are any bearings pressed into a mounting like the ones that you guys used in your lab. Those are flange mounted bearings, and here we're looking at a pillow block mount as well. You can just buy a housing or a mounting by itself. We also have something that's not mentioned in the book called linear bearings. If you need to have something slide up and down a shaft, right, like many 3D printers now have these printing heads that slide up and down these shafts. What kind of bearing are you going to use there? Well, you're going to choose a linear bearing. That linear bearing is designed to ride up and down a shaft and give you a very precise, smooth operation. Or you can buy an entire assembly of guide rails and carriage that are all built together. So it's got the entire housing as well as the entire rail that you can buy together matched, and mount them just to a plate if you want to buy it that way. The linear bearings here, they need to be pressed into or clamped into some kind of housing that you build yourself. We also have rod end linkages, which is a kind of a bearing that you put at the end of a hydraulic piston. You see these a lot in outdoor vehicles, say your front end loader, where you need to have the end of a rod that can twist and turn and rotate. And then we've got more and more and more bearings, and I'm not going to go through all of these. There are specialty bearings out there. As you can see, there's a lot. So let's dive into the two most common that you're going to end up buying. Actually, touch briefly on three. Ball bearings themselves. This, under the ball bearing area, is the most excellent education on different kinds of ball bearings and why you would choose one versus the other. And I'm not going to go through all of these. There's so many different ball bearings here they go through. There's 9 different, and you can dive into each one of these categories and learn about those categories. You've got your basic ball bearing with open, no shield, basically, and no seal. But then you've got your permanently lubricated ball bearings. These are ones with a seal on it. They're ideal for environments where you've got chemicals or water that may destroy the bearing if it gets in there. And it tells you why you would buy that bearing. Then you've got special high load bearings, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of education here about the different bearings that are out there, and I'm not going to dive into them all. Next thing I want to talk about is plain bearings. And once again, we've got a lot of different kinds of plain bearings. You've got special oil embedded sleeve bearings. These are often the sintered bronze, but they don't necessarily have to be sintered bronze. You've got high load, you've got ultra low friction, you've got all different kinds of bearings that come slightly different ways. Sometimes they're just a basic sleeve that you have to press into a hole that you would use that way. Sometimes they have a flange so that when you press it, you've got a flange that you know it's going to stop at exactly the right point when you press it into a plate, and so forth. You've got a lot of different kinds. And then you got specialty thrust bearings that are basically just cups that hold the end of a rod. So if you spin that rod, that cup holds it in place so it spins, it allows it to spin smoothly. This is just a really, really good education on that. And then finally, we're going to talk about mounted bearings. And the mounted bearings show you all the different kind of mounting formats. One of the most common mounted bearings you're going to run into is what's called a 2-bolt flange mount. And on the left here, we can see that that's one of my options for the mounted type. And among those, we're going to see, in this case, the 6 or 7 different standard styles. And the most common is the mounted ball bearing with 2-bolt flange, no special, it's not low profile. It doesn't have any special application. It usually has a grease fitting on it, a Zerk fitting. If we click on that, we can see that we can select among the shaft diameter. See, I know my shafts in the lab are 5/8, so if I click on 5/8 of an inch, right, it gives me 2 standard bearings in that size range. And the first one is your basic bearing with cast iron housing, and the second one is a bearing with a nickel plated cast iron housing. The first one can handle a higher speed up to 9,500 RPM, right? And it has less load capability, right? 2,150 pounds. The second one is a nickel plated bearing. It can handle a higher load capability, dynamic capability, and but it can't go as fast. So each one of these has different aspects of it. You might choose one versus the other. The second one is actually cheaper, so if your load is much, much lower, you probably don't care. So you would select the cheaper one. That's all I plan to talk about in the Master Car. I just wanted to introduce you to the website and all the different bearing education that is there. Let me stop the recording.